In at 5, ghost attack. Now this one comes from a CCTV camera in a hospital mortuary. It's nighttime and everything seems to be normal until one of the gurneys outside begins to roll around on its own. I mean, it could easily be credited to the wind, but considering the other gurney as well as the trees are barely moving, I'm quick to say this is legit. It intensely rolls around for a few seconds longer before tipping onto its side. Another camera angle shows us a mortuary worker at a water fountain who becomes alarmed by the movement and approaches the gurney. As he does though, it rolls away from him and the worker quickly flees. In at 4, makeup tutorial madness. Now this video starts like any ordinary makeup video. Nikki begins by showing us her eye makeup tutorial. Great, please, by all means. Everything is normal until around the 40-second mark when a black screen appears beside her. She stops for a moment before continuing. Then at 50 seconds, things get real up. She stops, completely frozen this time, staring at something on the screen. She then begins manically smashing her head into her table until her head is split open and blood is pooling down her face. It then cuts to black. Here's a short clip that we probably can't show you, but we'll do our best. The video has garnered 7 million views since its upload in 2014, and I can see why. It's horrifying. The uploader goes on to say that they were anonymously sent it and have no further information. It is for you to decide whether it's real or fake. What do you guys think? If it's fake, they did an incredible job, and if it's real, well, I'm never watching a makeup tutorial again. Those eyeshadow palettes. In at 3, demons. Now this video is titled Real Demons Caught on Tape and has garnered over 4 million views since its upload in 2009. Many were quick to label it as fake, and I don't think they're wrong, but regardless, the video is truly horrifying. The uploader is standing in a dark room, breathing heavily as arms begin to emerge from the ceiling. Yeah, multiple arms, like 30 arms, reaching out trying to grab the person behind the camera. It continues for a few moments before going black, and what emerges is horrifying, truly horrifying. The arms begin to form a figure that charges towards the camera. It then cuts to black once again. It's short but very effective. Take a look. In at 2, cursed KLEENEX. This creepy commercial was released in Japan in the 1980s, and honestly, I never ever want to see this again in my life. Not only is the commercial itself disturbing, but the events following have made everyone question whether something darker was at play here. In the commercial, we can see a grumpy small child that slightly looks like the devil, but we won't get into that, and a woman in white singing an eerie song while playing with KLEENEX, throwing it in the air, the usual. The boy doesn't move though, just sits there with his arms crossed, looking like he hates the world even though he's fresh out the womb and hasn't paid taxes yet. After this commercial was released, supposedly all the crew died under suspicious circumstances, and the actress had very bad luck. There was also a rumor floating around that the child died due to lead poisoning from the paint covering his skin. Dark. Now these are just rumors and definitely not confirmed, but after watching it, I feel like my life has been cursed.
It's going to be a fine night tonight.
And finally, in at number 1, Elisa Lam. On February 19th, 2013, Elisa Lam was found dead in a water tank atop the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles. Now, the cause of her death is a mystery, but more frightening, the video footage released following her death has become infamous online, and many theories about her final moments have been floating around for a long time. The CCTV footage itself showed Lam repeatedly entering and exiting an elevator. She seems to hit some buttons, but the doors won't close. Though it could be malfunctioning, many people online have summed it up as a paranormal event. The video was a tough watch and personally makes me feel very uncomfortable. Take a look. However, with the history of the Cecil Hotel, it's not so hard to believe that other forces were at play here. It opened its doors in 1927 and has been riddled with mysterious happenings and unfortunate events. One noteworthy guest was Elizabeth Short, aka the Black Dahlia, who reportedly stayed at the hotel before her untimely and grisly death.
Kicking off our number 5 spot, ORAN, the naysayer. In ancient history, it was often thought that burying an individual in the foundation of a new building, particularly churches or fortresses, would ensure that the structure would never fall, and that sacrifice would be taken by the soil as a blood offering. Well, in 563 AD in ancient Scotland, a priest named ORAN accompanied his supposed brother, St. Columba, to the Scottish Isle of Iona. There they built a church, but St. Columba was under the assumption that the structure would not stand without a sacrifice to the structure's foundations, and our man, ORAN, volunteered. After he was buried beneath the chapel's walls, consigned to the earth, the church was successfully built. It wasn't until a few months later that Oran shoved his face through one of the lower foundation walls and cried out to a passerby that, and we quote, "There is no hell as you suppose, nor heaven that people talk about. I have seen it, and there is nothing." In another version of the story, St. Columba wanted to see Oran once more and opened a pit underneath the chapel. When he realised that Oran was not dead, he had that pit quickly covered with earth to save Oran's soul from, in his words, the world and its sin. That's messed up.
In at 4, soul leaving a dead body. Now this video comes from a CCTV camera in a hospital hallway. What can be seen is a dead body covered by a sheet on the left side of the room. Everything is normal for a few seconds before a ghostly figure begins to emerge out of the deceased corpse before quickly disappearing. Now this one I'm skeptical about. I'm skeptical about almost everything on this list, but this one in particular. Considering how quickly the spirit disappeared and the awkwardness of its initial appearance, I'm quick to assume someone crafted this up in an iMovie. But what do you guys think? In at 3, the shoe thief. Okay, before I continue, this one has yet to be debunked, but I'm almost certain it's fake. Well, I hope it's fake, because if it's not, I'm well and truly terrified. This one comes to us from a CCTV camera in the lobby of a mortuary. We have 2 figures who I initially thought were dead, but quickly realised were just innocently sleeping before the door swings open. We can see no one is there because, of course, this is a ghost vid. I would hope no one is there. We have a few moments of nothing before we see the legs of one of the men raise up in the air before his entire person is pulled up and off the bed. The guy's reaction is alarmed and he looks truly horrified by what just happened. Still, I'm calling fake, but what do you guys think? Ghostly shoe thief or green screen magic? In at 2, the ghost. Now this video comes to us from a hospital corridor. Don't worry guys, a morgue plays into this story. We see a handful of patients sleeping on the ground, unaware of what is about to occur. At the end of the corridor we see a shadowy figure emerge out of nothingness, appearing to walk closer and closer to the unsuspecting sleeping patients. It continues on for a few seconds longer before speeding down the corridor and out of sight. Theories have speculated that it could be a spirit from the morgue below. But if so, why is it in such a hurry? What is it doing lingering by the sleeping patients? I guess we'll never know. And finally, in at 1, the slamming door. This video is a classic gem that we just have to bring back. A morgue worker recorded this while on a night shift, and honestly, it does not get less creepy the more you watch it. The worker whips out his camera after a door can be heard slamming in the distance. Peering through the glass, we see flickering of lights and a red door moving back and forth. The 2 workers go to investigate, moving closer to the commotion. As they get closer, the violent swings intensify, and it's pretty apparent that there's no wind. You know, considering they're in a basement. They halt the door, moving it back and forth, checking its hinges and showing that there's no sign of foul play or fault with the door itself. I won't assume, but that was a ghost for sure. In at 5, lost in the catacombs. The catacombs are terrifying, truly terrifying. A maze below the Paris streets built with bones of corpses throughout history. I mean, enough said really. This video was supposedly recovered from deep within the catacombs, and what it shows is truly haunting. First of all, the video begins with a child's menacing voice describing the catacombs.
Below the city lies a labyrinth of ancient tunnels and mass graves known as the catacombs.
Before an explorer begins to detail the recovered footage. Throughout the video we see an unnamed man traversing through the haunting labyrinth. He enters rooms completely littered with bones. He begins to start panicking, breathing heavily and picking up his pace. The most haunting aspect, in my opinion, is that he's silent, running alone through the bone-riddled maze of hallways and rooms. After a few moments he starts to run along a dark corridor before dropping his camera completely. The last thing we see are his feet running away in the distance. No one knows what happened to the explorer. Could he still be down there? Was this a prank to deter others from exploring the winding tunnels? I guess we'll never know.
Next up at number 4, back from the morgue. In 2011, a 50-year-old South African man had suffered an asthma attack and subsequently died whilst at a party with his family. Distraught, his family called in an undertaker to deal with the body, who examined the corpse, checked his pulse, looked for a heartbeat, and just as he suspected, found out there was nothing there. he was dead. He then took him to the morgue where staff put his body into a locked refrigerated compartment. 21 hours later, staff heard the one thing that you don't want to hear when working at a morgue: someone or something crying for help. Ayanda Makolo, the morgue owner, later told reporters that he was so terrified that he called the police, his first instinct being to protect his staff from whatever was out there calling. The police arrived with firearms, just in case of course, when they opened the compartment to discover the 50-year-old man, pale and distraught, but nevertheless alive and well. He was later rushed to hospital where doctors checked him over and deemed him in perfectly fine health, later discharging him back to his family, who had heard the news of his resurrection whilst planning his funeral. Crazy stuff. Coming in at our number 3 spot, Grigori Rasputin. If you know anything about Rasputin, the notorious Russian mystic who, alongside having psychic powers, also claimed that he could cure the Russian royal family of their genetic haemophilia, then you'll know that Grigori Rasputin came back from the dead on quite a few occasions. The aristocracy of Russia were both jealous and concerned of the sway that he held at court, and so had made numerous attempts at his life, but to no avail. On June 29th, 1914, Rasputin's first murderer, a former prostitute named Gaseva, stabbed Rasputin repeatedly in his stomach, so much so that his intestines actually spilled out of his body. She proclaimed to the streets of St. Petersburg that she had killed the Antichrist, but Rasputin rose from the dead a few days later. Again, on December 16th, 1916, a group of his conspirators fed him a cake with enough cyanide in it to kill 5 men. After he didn't even flinch or show sign of wavering, the group whipped out a gun and shot Rasputin point blank in the back. Of course, he still didn't die, and when he returned, they shot him 3 times again. They beat him with clubs, allegedly cut off his manhood, tied him up and dumped his body in the ice-cold Neva River. A few days later, they retrieved Rasputin's body from the river, finally dead, but guess what? They'd found that he'd somehow ripped apart the ropes that tied his hands, and also found water in his lungs during an autopsy, indicating clearly that he'd still been alive before drowning. And also, as the legend goes, as his killers were burning Rasputin's body in the St. Petersburg woods, the body sat bolt upright in the fire, trying to get back up. Damn. Next up at number 2, Anne Green. Way back when, in 1650, a woman named Anne Green was convicted of murdering her newborn child and later hiding the body at the house of her employer. She was sentenced to death by hanging, and with her last words she fiercely protested her innocence and begged for mercy in reception of her mortal soul. After the hangsman kicked out the stool from beneath her, her body was left to hang for over an hour, where during this time her body was thumped and pulled down upon to ensure that she was actually dead. Eventually, Anne's corpse was cut down from the gallows and placed into a coffin, and later sent to a doctor to conduct her autopsy. Just as the doctor was about to slice her open with a scalpel, Anne's corpse bolted upright and screamed, "Hallelujah, I have returned." Seriously. Reportedly, doctors first kicked Anne in the chest in complete horror and shock, as you would, and then, after they realised she wasn't a hulking zombie, they warmed her ice-cold body and gently revived her. In a completely insane turn of events, Anne Green was granted a reprieve from the crime and declared innocent, and she then went on to have 3 more children, which is a weird story to find on your family tree. And finally, at our number 1 spot, Matthew Hall. Ever thought about your own funeral? Who'd be there? Whether you'd lived a good life, whether you were a good person? Well, in our number 1 spot, Matthew Hall lived to see his own. On October the 2nd, 1571, the recently deceased young farmer Matthew was lying in a coffin on the way to his own funeral. The whole village of Browing, Hertfordshire had come out to show their condolences. He was a well-loved man, and his distressed fiancée led the procession. As they made their way towards the church, one of the pallbearers, a young man also called Matthew, slipped on the wet leaves beneath him, causing the procession to drop the coffin. Everyone gasped, horrified by the sight, a bad omen indeed. But when the men lifted the coffin once more, they were even more shocked by what they heard next. The distinct and unmistakable sound of knocking coming from within the coffin. Matthew Hall had returned from the dead and surprisingly was as fit as a fiddle, with no ailment so to speak. He went on to marry his promised fiancée and lived for another 24 years, and ever since then the same village has practiced the tradition of Old Man's Day. Every year on October the 2nd, in celebration, children from the village bring brooms to sweep the leaves from the lane before the church to make sure that no one slips on them again, apparently.